You're watching BCTV. We're all about Brantford. You're watching BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Brantford.
Good evening. We'll call this meeting of the Brantford Planning Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, May 19th, 2022. I have 7:02 p.m. We'll introduce members of the commission members and staff before we get going. To my far right, we have Commission Member Joe Viuzzo. Turning the corner, we have Commission Member Fred Russo. To my left, we have Commission Member Marcy Pelusi, and next to Marcy is Commission Member Massimo Liguri. Our staff this evening is our Town Planner Harry Smith and Assistant Planner Evan Brining. Michelle Martin is somewhere recording this, our Clerk Recording Secretary, and I am Chuck Anders, Chair. And I'll ask our Secretary to read our notices of public hearing.
The Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Brantford, Connecticut hereby gives notice of a public hearing to be held on Thursday, May 19th, 2022 at 7 p.m. at the Brantford Fire Headquarters, 45 North Main Street, Brantford, Connecticut, to consider the following. 1. Application number 22-3.8, special exception for a single-family home located at 26 Old New England Road, Robert and Elena McLean, applicants and owners. Item number 2, affordable housing plan proposed for adoption and on file in the town clerk's office and on the town website at https://www.brantford-ct.gov/sites/files/files-files-docs/ I knew it was going to get me, /proposed_AA_plan_for_public_score/on_public_hearing_051922.pdf. At said hearings, all persons will have the right to be heard. Copies are on file at the Planning and Zoning Commission's office at the Planning and Zoning Department, 1019 Main Street, Brantford, Connecticut, 06405. Written communications may be sent to the above address or to planning and zoning at brantford-ct.gov.
Thank you, Marcy. Great job with the backslashes. We'll follow our normal format for a public hearing. So it's the applicant, the presenter goes first. Come up here. There's microphones here, and we have the podium where you can make a presentation. After that, we typically turn it over to town staff for summary of staff reports and open up for questions, comments from commission members. When that's done, then we have the public portion. After you come forward, state your name and address for the record, grab a microphone, make your comments. Then we allow the applicant to respond to any of the public comments. We will, we may or may not close the public hearing depending on how it goes. So with that, and I do want to make an announcement, there's a couple items, continued items on the agenda. The number 2 and 3 are the Buckley Road open space residential development, and also on number 5, which is a zoning regulation amendment by Sunrise Cove Associations regarding pre-existing summer cottage camps. Both of those, the applicant in both of those cases has requested that we open and continue those matters. So those matters will be continued. If you come here on either of those, we don't expect to hear any substantive comments, and we would request that you come to the next meeting where you can actually hear the presentation. So with that, we'll turn it over to our first item, which is the proposed affordable housing plan, which is required by the state of Connecticut, and we have copies of it up here, and we have our consultant Glenn Chalder, who's going to show us a summary PowerPoint and review with both the commission and the public the proposed affordable housing plan for the next 5 years. Glenn?
Thank you very much. On behalf, I guess, better sound? Yep. Okay. Thank you. I am the applicant representing the commission before the commission here tonight. I have. There we go. Put together a brief PowerPoint presentation to summarize our work. I'm Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. Again, I've had a chance to work with the Affordable Housing Committee over the last probably 9 months or so in terms of preparing an affordable housing plan. State statutes, as the chairman indicated, require that all Connecticut municipalities prepare an affordable housing plan by June 1 of this year, and the plan shall specify how the municipality intends to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the municipality, and many communities are interpreting that to mean the number of affordable housing units in the municipality. But either way, the issue we have at the present time in Connecticut is an issue related to affordable housing. And most people say, well, you know, why is this an issue? And this chart or this graph is intended to identify the scenario that we see with regard to this today. The orange line on the chart represents the ratio between income, average income, and average sale prices of houses. And so if a house sells or rents at roughly 30% of income, it would be this red line, and that's considered to be sort of an affordability benchmark. That generally speaking, housing is considered affordable if people don't spend more than 30% of their income on it, or the house doesn't cost 3 times their income. So what we have here back in the late 1960s and early 1970s is that housing was about 2.5 times income. So if you were fortunate enough to buy a house at that time, it was affordable to you. We got into the 70s and then into the 80s and really into the late 90s. We were still bumping along at the threshold of affordability. It might have been painful, depending on interest rates, but it wasn't out of control. And what's happened since that time, this is the subprime mortgage crisis, you may recall, which resulted in the financial crash in 2006, 2008. It started to get back towards reality, but actually what's happened is it's increased since that time. And in fact, this data from the Federal Reserve stops in 2018. So what we've seen, what we call the COVID bump in terms of housing prices, has gone up even higher from here. So we have an affordability crisis in the state and in the country, that housing relative to incomes has become very expensive, and many people are being shut out of the housing market. It's a situation that the system, or the structure, if you will, isn't working right. So in simple economics, if there's more demand than supply, this is actually what starts to happen to the ratio and to housing prices, and this becomes a challenge. So the state, whoops, I apologize, too quick on the thumb there. The state asked each municipality to prepare this plan. Brantford, we worked with a working group who evaluated a number of different issues related to housing affordability in town. And the plan, which was prepared for review by the commission, contains 4 major sections: planning for housing choices, some background data, benchmarks, and then strategies for overall consideration. In terms of background data, what we discovered is that there may have been about 5,500 naturally occurring affordable housing units in Brantford. So that's what NOAA stands for, naturally occurring affordable housing. And the reason that it says may have been is the data in this report relies on the American Community Survey, and the most recent survey release is from 2020. So this information basically predates the current bump that we're seeing in terms of housing prices. But let's say, for the sake of discussion, there are thousands of naturally occurring affordable units in Brantford, but those prices escalated quite a bit. So we can't necessarily count on those as continuing to be affordable in the future. On the other hand, Brantford has 477 units, which the state does recognize as affordable housing units because they are restricted to sell or rent at affordable prices. That includes 243 units from the Housing Authority, from Brantford Interfaith Coalition, deed-restricted units, which the Commission has worked on in terms of affordable housing set-asides. And we also get credit for some rental assistance units and from CHFA and USDA mortgages. This is about 3% of the town's housing stock, 3.4%. But because it's less than 10%, the town is subject to the Affordable Housing Appeals procedure. So there's a number of reasons why we might want to be addressing affordable housing. The state says we need to address this issue. If we don't address it, we're going to continue to be vulnerable to the affordable housing appeals procedure. But the other reason is because there are significant needs in Brantford and elsewhere. Census data indicates that there's about 4,700 households in town that are housing cost burdened because they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And that can be a little strain on your budget. If you're making significant money, then 30% might be a choice that you would choose to make. But for people who are earning 80% of area median income or less, they don't have as much money for things like transportation or health care or transportation, health care, food, and these types of things. And in fact, there's about 6,000 households in Brantford that earn less than $75,000 per year, and about 2/3 of them, of a total of 4,100 households, are housing cost burdened. So there's about 4,000 people in town, or excuse me, more than 4,000 people, 4,000 households that struggle with housing cost and are making typical wages or lower than typical wages, and that, as a result, is evidence of the need for affordable housing. The goal, which was suggested for the plan, is provide for a variety of housing choices in Brantford for persons and families of all ages, incomes, and other characteristics such as race, ethnicity, disabilities, etc. The plan outlines strategies for the Commission's consideration going forward. This is a plan, so it doesn't change anything today, but it sets the stage for these types of activities in the future. Number 1 there, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.10. This is Chapter 4 of the Affordable Housing Plan. Recommend organizing local efforts, having a full-time committee, I shouldn't say full-time commission, a commission of the town working on housing affordability issues. This could be an advisory committee. Establishing a special housing fund. This is a way for funds to be set aside to support housing efforts and initiatives in the future, and then preparing standard documents and other things for deed-restricted housing. Deed-restricted housing does come with some burden on the municipality in terms of ensuring that the units are occupied by qualifying households and sell or rent at affordable prices. The next grouping is about guiding the design of affordable housing, and I should say guide the location of affordable housing. Those are 2 recommendations in the plan as to the best ways and places in Brantford to address that. The main way that Brantford and other municipalities can add affordable units is to look at opportunities to increase assisted housing. This is housing, again, the Housing Authority, Brantford Interfaith Coalition, and others. Look at opportunities to increase deed-restricted housing through the set-aside developments and affordable housing requirements, and then also look at ways to increase other state-recognized units. This chart here shows the current distribution of those units, and our goal would be to make that circle bigger and make each section of pie bigger as well. Brantford is somewhat unique in terms of the mobile home parks in town. This is naturally occurring affordable housing. It's generally not deed restricted, but they provide and address the housing needs of a broad segment of the population. The plan suggests that we continue to monitor that scenario because of challenges that can come up with property maintenance, unit condition, et cetera, to try to keep naturally occurring affordable housing in the community. And then strategy 4.9 is about reviewing regulations to increase housing options generally. Right. We have a situation with a shortage of supply. At the same time, our population is aging, housing needs are changing, and there may be interest in the future of more housing to address the needs of an aging population as well. So those are the strategies in the Affordable Housing Plan, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or anything else.
Thank you, Glenn. And I think Mr. Trotter, you mentioned that this was sort of a culmination. There was a separate committee. We reviewed, we had an informal public hearing earlier on an earlier draft of this, and there has been, so it's not the first time, obviously, this commission is looking at this, or even the town is just putting that on the record, so.
Correct, thank you.
So are there questions from any commission members or staff before we open it up to the public?
I have a question. My name is Massimo. Couple questions. And the stack housing that we're doing, you know, like pretty much project type. Pretty much project type housing that that's recommended to do. Is our school system going to even be able to handle the families for that amount of people kind of grouped into one district?
I think
that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I
probably.
think I would hesitate to call the type of housing being recommended in the plan as project-related. I mean, I think for the Housing Authority, we're recommending that it's called assisted housing. And the rationale is because some of the biggest challenges can be for people who earn, let's say, 50% or 40% or 30% of area median income. This can include the elderly or disabled. They don't generally produce school children. But people can outlive their savings, they can outlive their assets and need assistance. And there's not housing available in the marketplace unless it could be something such as the Housing Authority. So that would be one recommendation, and that might be a scenario where most of the units in a development are affordable or restricted as affordable. So that might be a concentration of units. I think in the other situations, what the Commission has worked on and been successful at are the deed-restricted units, which occur as a percentage of a development, and that way they're spread throughout the community in appropriate locations and places. I think we're going to always continue to see changing age demographics in Brantford in the future. People are living longer, and so we're going to continue to have an aging population, even if we get younger families in here. But the general finding on multifamily housing is that it doesn't have a tremendous impact on school enrollments. If we were going to build 400 units in 1 year, yeah, you'd see an impact. But I think our goal over time is to address this issue and provide housing options and choices in ways, hopefully, that the school system can accommodate it.
Is there a cap on the prices that is considered for affordable
There is.
housing?
If you have the plan nearby on page 6, we updated. So there's a supplement which was sent out to the Commission for this meeting. It's a supplement. The HUD issues income information annually, which indicates what the area median income is and then what the applicable income would be at 80% or at other percentages. And they issued this in April, and so this page 6 of the plan contains the information in terms of, actually back in the appendix contains the median income information, but those calculations are carried forward to the bottom of page 6. And this identifies the maximum rental rate and sale price for different configurations of units such as studio or 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, et cetera. The requirement to fall into the affordable housing program is that the units be deed restricted to sell or rent at those prices. And generally speaking, it's for a period of at least 40 years. And in the case such as the Housing Authority, it's generally in perpetuity. Those units are built. So each year, the income numbers are adjusted by HUD, and as a result, these calculations would change each year. We did have an anomaly in the past year that, believe it or not, the median income for the state of Connecticut jumped $10,000 in 1 year. And I don't know if anybody else sort of felt that in your paychecks, but it also, I believe, is kind of a hangover from some of the payroll protection and other activities that occurred as a result of COVID. It's generally considered to be a 1-year bump, and next year we think the median income is going to go down to reflect that. So my advice to the Commission and to others is to continue to monitor this situation each year so we know exactly what those numbers are.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Just to clarify, are affordable rental units counted the same way as deed restricted in terms of the overall number percentage for the state?
I don't want to open a Pandora's box here, but the answer is there are two ways that we would tabulate affordable units. So one way is how many units, number of units, and then the answer to your question is yes. Whether it's an affordable rental unit or an affordable sale unit, it's each one unit, and so that gets us closer to the 10% goal. In addition, though, the state has another program, if you will, that tabulates what they call housing unit equivalent points. And so a municipality can actually earn a moratorium from the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure through the production of units. That could get us a 4-year moratorium. And in that program, certain units, if they are deeper levels of affordability, you get more points. If they're rental as opposed to ownership, you get more points. If it's a set-aside development under 830G, you get points both for the affordable units and the market rate units. So in the appendix, we actually have the table that shows how those housing unit equivalent points get tabulated, and that could be something for the commission to evaluate at some time in the future.
But generally speaking on that, if there's a new development and the rental rates are consistent with, you know, say this 2-bedroom is under 1674, it doesn't get classified unless it's deed restricted.
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question was, below that you say sale price at 3.5%, is that the interest rate that on
So
the
I think you're
house?
looking at an older,
Well, just the left-hand column, can I see this one?
Sure.
Oh, that's the mortgage rate?
yes.
Okay.
So,
But even so, the rates for the houses, so 2-bedroom, 212,000, you know, different parts of town, different size lots, different, you know, could easily, you know, maybe you get a 2-bedroom condo for that, but do you get a 2-bedroom, you know, single-family home in a, you know, more desirable, I don't want to say desirable, but more, you know, say waterfront, you know, for lack of a better word, you know, it wouldn't cost
That'd be
$212,000.
much
How
more,
does the
yeah.
state rectify that in terms of trying to, you know, distribute affordability evenly throughout the town?
So it's possible to say that the state looks at this scenario through filtered glasses, and their question is not is it waterfront or anything else. The issue is, can somebody who is low to moderate income, earning 80% of median income or less, afford the unit? And this is where the requirement comes in for it to either be assisted or deed restricted, and deed restricted for at least 40 years. And so when they would be interested in occupying a unit, the first test for the municipality and anywhere else would be, does this household meet the income threshold? If they earn more than the median income, then they are not eligible. If they earn less, then they are eligible. The rental rate and sale price depends on the configuration of the unit, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, whatever it would be. And then the income is tabulated here would be the operative income. So that would be the only way that the state looks at it. So if a unit was to sell for $212,100,
Right.
that's $2 more than the threshold. That does not meet the state's criteria.
But it wouldn't be counted unless it was deed restricted either.
Correct. It has to
Which
be
kind of
deed-
leads me to the, you know, we're looking at it from the standpoint of affordability and the person trying to go into the unit, but if it's a rental situation, say, how do we incentivize developers to want to offer more deed restricted units and put that, I mean, because, you know, honestly, you know, you can find many 2-bedrooms in town that are 1,600 and, you know, and it's not a change for what the landlord's income is, but how do you incentivize them to?
So there's two
to do
ways
that,
that
or-
municipalities are addressing this issue currently. Number one is, if housing units get built in Brantford and there's not a 10% set aside happening at the same time, then we are falling behind on our percentage. So a number of municipalities are saying, from some time forward, maybe a new regulation change adopted by the commission, every housing development has to provide at least 10%. We don't want to be falling backwards on this number. Above that, communities are also looking at incentives, which could be density or coverage or parking or height or other ways and say, you're required to give us 10%. If you give us 20%, then you can have some additional advantages. And maybe it's just another
Or
floor on
units
the
on
building.
smaller lots, say, right.
Exactly, those types of scenarios.
And we're already doing that with the incentive housing zone. So all the development that took place at Summit Place, the affordable set aside, if you will, is 20%. And then there's a density bump in units per acre that are allowed. So that's provided for in state statute, I believe. And Brantford took advantage of that several years ago. That's just an example, but there are other ways.
Yeah, I think that's the recommendation of the plan is to evaluate ways that work in Brantford that could help us begin to address this scenario.
But is that something we can do consistently across all applications? Because I don't know that that's being evenly applied, so one application, and I think that might want to vary depending on the number of units proposed in the application. So, 20% of a, some, and I don't know how many units there are versus 20% of a 10-person, 10
Yes,
units. So
I agree.
that feels a lot different. So
some-
I just don't know if that's been standardized in places or if it's just
Communities
an option for developers.
have developed programs that work in their municipality, in their circumstances. So some communities have had a threshold that the set-aside applies for developments of 5 units or more, or 10 units or more, or other types. Sometimes you see with a 10-unit threshold that people come in with 9-unit developments. So they don't have to meet this particular situation. There are some communities in Connecticut that have investigated and some which have implemented fee in lieu of affordable housing. And the issue is everybody's going to have to make a contribution. It could either be through a unit or through dedication of dollars for the Housing Trust Fund or the Special Housing Fund.
And does that get points to apply to,
Not until the units are built.
but no, if they do a fee in lieu?
If they do the fee goes into the fund.
But doesn't
They've
credit
met
the
their
percentage.
obligation, but you don't get housing unit equivalent points or units on the ground points for that until the units are constructed.
And so how do you recommend addressing what the fee should be if it's in lieu of?
There's quite a bit of diversity around the state in terms of what those fees are. If you get into Fairfield County towards New York, they're eye-opening. Mansfield, up where Yukon is, has also done a fee situation. Again, I think the fee is eye-opening, and other communities are being more modest. And the question is, we're not trying to be punitive here. We have a societal need, which is not going to be solved anytime soon. And so how can we address this? We're not expected to build all the units in one time in one development. What we're looking to do over time is to try to build a wonderful community, as we have in Brantford, and to address this scenario also. Sometimes the people who occupy these units are people who work in schools, in town hall. They could be police or fire. They could be people who work in the grocery store, people at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, all of the retail establishments we have in town. So can there be a way for them to also live in Brantford? And perhaps the answer could be yes.
I think my question about the fee, though, is, say you're doing a development and it's going to cost you $100,000 to build one of the units that might be. I don't necessarily see that the fee equaling $100,000 to compensate for the costs to develop a unit. So I'm not sure how that serves us over setting aside, a required number of units.
So
And maybe I'm wrong in that logic, but that's sort of my.
I think the challenge comes down to the math and working through the math. There can be a situation that the requirement that 10% of the units be set aside. Sometimes if a calculation works out to 1.1 units, unless you build 2 units,
Yeah.
you haven't met the 1.1 standard. And now that starts to get
That's
a little
restrictive, yeah.
draconian. So
Yeah.
the issue could be that whole units have to be built as whole units, and
Percentage and-
partial units
Could
have
be
to be
fixed.
dollars. So that
Okay.
could be,
That's interesting.
So I think, again, these types of situations, 169 municipalities in Connecticut are working on this. I've seen some very creative ideas coming along, so I think this will be an area. The plan sets the stage for these types of conversations in the future, and we'll continue to search for best management practices that work best for Brantford.
So there's a lot of open space land in different areas, right? Isn't there something the state could do instead of always passing this over onto an entrepreneur, a builder, or whatever, building these projects and just handing over the cost to them? Is there something that maybe the state could do to build some things on some open land that, you know?
Yeah, I think open space is highly valued and highly prized by everybody. It's a strong part of the community. So the decision to give up open space, if you will, there's two definitions of open space. Some people define open space as preserved land, and people are reluctant to give that up. In other cases, people define open space as undeveloped land, which means it's privately owned. It could be developed at some time in the future, and that might be a possibility. The state, the cost of housing these days, the state is trying to devote their resources to housing authorities and other situations which deal with people at 30, 40, and 50% of AMI. Those are the most challenging scenarios. So they don't have unlimited resources. So what they're trying to do is work with municipalities to address this situation. And again, I think people are being creative here. So how can we address this so that there's a reasonable balance of housing for each community? That's the direction, I believe.
Glenn, I'm aware, I think Stanford has something like a 10%, if you're over a certain number of units, a 10% have to be affordable. So that's an example of something you had mentioned. And then I'm aware that New Haven recently adopted a fairly rigorous affordability provisions for certain areas in town particularly. But I think those are both urban areas, I think. I don't know, like, we're more suburban. Are you aware of many towns sort of similar to Brantford, that what they have done, or specific ones at some point when we start tackling this and you know, trying to be less ad hoc and more systematic?
I think that is the right approach. I've been monitoring some of the work that's been going on in Darien. Darien, the economics in Darien are different, a different level, if you will, than they are in Brantford. But Darien, despite that, you might say that affordable housing is harder to create there because the distinction between market rate and affordable prices. But they recognized that their 10% set-aside requirement was not working, that they were still falling behind because of the number of units that were kind of following under the threshold. So my understanding is they've changed the threshold and they upped the percentage to, I think it was 14 or 16%. And the issue is we're not just trying to tread water here. What we're trying to do is make a meaningful difference. And so they decided to go a little bit more remedial with their percentage. And Darien also has a fee in lieu of provision. I think the number makes no sense for Brantford, but it's Darien. And I believe they've had some success in Darien. So they've gotten 2 moratoriums from creating housing unit equivalent points. And so I guess the answer is that there are strategies and tools to be investigated. And even that journey begins with a step, as we're here tonight, is let's put affordable housing on our radar screen as something for us to be working at, and then start to look at these scenarios. And I know that there's going to be continuing training for planning and zoning commissioners, and Harry and I, in terms of professional, we're going to find success stories that will work in Brantford, and I think that helps show a path forward.
You had mentioned Mansfield. Do you know what they're up to? What do they do?
They have a very, I'm tempted to say academic approach. I mean, it's pretty involved. Have you looked at it, Harry?
Not in any detail. I know they just had a significant amount of housing created, and they're doing quite a bit of development around the university. I think that's driving it, but sorry. So I think some of that is that intense demand for housing related to the university and what's actually being constructed up there.
They almost have an algorithm set up, both in terms of the number of units that need to be created and or the affordable housing set aside. So I read it a couple of times, scratched my head and walked away, and thought that there weren't too many communities that I feel that would be applicable, easily transferable, and give them time to get this figured out, and then see how that works.
Thanks. Any other questions from
I do have a
Fred?
question. Yeah, Glenn, you mentioned that Brantford has, I think, under 4% of affordable housing, deed-restricted affordable housing. And the minimum that the state requires, well, not requires, but recommends, is 10%. So I guess and 10%, I agree with you, that just treads water. It doesn't make you go up or down. You're always going to stay the same. But just in numbers, how many units would it take Brantford to get to the minimum?
I believe that's in here. I just want to. Not putting my hand on it right away. So let me do some quick math here. If we're at 3.4%,
Would it be like another 1,000 units?
so bear with me for a sec. This is the wonder of smartphones, right? Well, I got good news and bad news for you.
Go ahead.
The good news is it's less than 1,000 units.
Really? Oh, what's surprising?
Bad news is it's still 921.
Okay.
So, but think about it this way, at 3.4%, we're about at a third of the 10%. The 10% is not a state mandate. I just want to kind of make that clear for everybody. It's a threshold. And it says for communities which are above this level, the affordable housing appeals procedure doesn't apply. For communities below the threshold, it does. So the state's not telling us we have to have 10%. We could get moratoria. But it is something that can create challenges and difficulties. And so the issue is, could we address the need for affordable housing and be exempt? And that's, I think, something for the commission to think about.
I think
for
in
the future.
our town, in some ways, the town's become a victim of the law too, because there is, at least from the reports that you gave us, there's plenty of affordable housing, but not deed restricted.
Correct.
And, whether it's deed restricted or not, it's still affordable. And
It was affordable.
well, everything is relative, because you know what? Markets go up, markets go down. Marcia's in the real estate business. She'll confirm that, I'm sure. But I'm just going to go by the numbers you presented. So I don't want to use anything that's hypothetical, because we don't have anything that's hypothetical. But it would just seem to me that the way the law is, I'm not against affordable housing, but it seems that the way the law is written, it is punitive to some degree. Because we can say, for our community, I don't know about any other community, I don't know about Mansfield, whatever, but our community, just the geographics of it all, there's not lots of open space to build more units. The town really is kind of a one-family type thing. We've got tons of condos, we've got tons of mobile homes. We have all that. And so we've become, to some degree, and maybe we're the exception to the rule, but we've become the victim of the law. Because if we have to come up with 1,000 units, even at a very slow pace, we're only talking about the 10%. Anytime someone builds something that's not affordable, brings that 3.4 lower.
If they don't do 10%.
We have to, the 10% is, in a sense, not realistic in this regard, that if 15 or 20 units or 100 units are built in Brantford in a particular year, and those are not affordable, our rate goes down.
Correct.
So in the end, it's more than 1,000. That's what I would say. The competition is just not trying to get affordable housing, but it's to stay up in pace with what else is being built that's not affordable. And it's not going to be affordable. Even those that are going to put money into the trust, that doesn't help the numbers. And so I'm just thinking, just as not as a commissioner here, but as a resident, how do we ever get to that number? Unless we become draconian and say, it's 30%. It takes care of the 10%, and it adds, it takes care of the people that are building that are not affordable. And I don't know if you can do that. I mean, it just seems that where's the, I know you have to be creative, but you have to be pretty creative to
Yeah,
get around this one, I think.
It's challenging, but I don't think it's impossible. If we think back to Brantford 100 years ago and what the population was and how it's grown since that time, there are opportunities for infill development. We can strengthen our town center by transit-oriented development near the station. Some communities are looking at business buildings along Route 1 and other places and saying, look, some of the first floors are vacant, but the second floors are definitely vacant. Why couldn't we convert? We've got perhaps thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of square feet, which is space available. Why couldn't we make that housing, which would support the businesses and employees and other things? So housing can be hiding in plain sight, or the opportunities can be hiding in plain sight. So I think that today might be just an awakening a little bit for Brantford and the Commission and others to be aware of the challenges that we have seen with affordable housing, and the fact that a lack of supply, whether in Brantford or elsewhere, Connecticut's not going to stand pat, right? It's a desirable place. It's going to continue to grow for businesses and for people. So the question is, how could we perhaps address this need? Not necessarily solve it,
Right.
but address it. Make some progress so that we are a more complete community for more people.
Glenn, just a question. I don't know if you could do the math of how many more units we would need to get to the 4-year moratorium. My guess it would be substantially lower.
So the challenge on that one is that we have to tabulate the number of units that have been created since 1990. So I
Right.
think we get the 9 units at Summit Place, right?
There's more, but there isn't, we haven't really done the exhaustive analysis of it. We just haven't done it.
Okay.
But we haven't, we're not in Milford, for example, which experienced quite a number of 830G applications and was getting, I don't know if they've achieved it, but they were getting pretty close. We're nowhere near there. So I just ballpark, I wouldn't think
I
we
think
were very
Fairfield's
close,
pretty
really.
close. I mean, they have built a number, because they had the 3rd train station show up, they were able to do quite a bit. They have approved enough units for 2 moratoriums, but the construction is not proceeding at the pace that they thought. So they just adopted their affordable housing plan. I think they're within 50 points, just almost any one of the projects that have been approved. Once it gets CO'd, boom, they got a moratorium, and the next one's not far behind because the other units, will be sort of in construction. So it doesn't always revolve around having to have a train station, but that can provide an opportunity. We have water and sewer in Brantford, so that can help us support. But I think the idea here is community building. We're not just going to put projects wherever we can type of thing. I think the idea is how can we strengthen the neighborhoods in Brantford, the types of situations, and address that need. I think that would be my hope.
I think my concern, though, is, the burden moving forward is put on any developer that comes forward with a new application, and, the numbers that they're offering don't get us anywhere past treading water because, A, we don't enforce it, or we don't have the zoning to incentivize them in some other ways to financially compensate the cost of doing it. And then I think about just the maintenance of the reporting for the affordable units. I've heard, I don't really know the particulars, that it's a bit complicated. So, so I see that, and I feel like, we're falling behind. And then I look at just the reality of what's out there as far as naturally affordable units, and I get very frustrated that we can't count them, because I think we do have that, environment already. And it's just, technically not being acknowledged by the state and the moratorium. So it kind of leaves me in a catch-22 about how much to push on any given application for more units when the ones that we have that are naturally occurring aren't being counted. And,
There are discussions around these sorts of issues. I would urge you to be in contact with your legislative delegation. The question is, for communities such as Brantford, as Hamden, as other communities which are have a large component of naturally occurring affordable housing, why are they subject to 830G the way that communities that don't have any affordable housing? We're all in the same bucket. So some conversation that have occurred as to whether or not 10 naturally occurring affordable housing units are the equivalent of 1 deed restricted affordable. And as that number goes up and down, and here we are right now in a market where that number is less, it's a trailing indicator, I guess we would call it, but we still get credit for that. And so that could be several hundred units. It gets us closer to the 920 that we need. And the issue is, we celebrate what we have, and the question is, how can we keep those units affordable, right? Because in an up market like we're in right now, I mean, sometimes rents and sale prices, I mean, are 20 to 30%. It's crazy what's going on. The issue ends up being that those units are no longer affordable because they're not deed restricted, and that number is going to get bigger. It gets much closer to the 921 type thing.
But I will say, we have many older buildings that, you can do a good amount of renovation and make them nice apartments, but just unless you're really gutting them completely and reconfigure, because they're houses that have turned into apartments. So the units themselves, just by the evolution of the year the home was built, don't really lend themselves to the rates that we're seeing in the market now because of just, the age they were built and so on and so forth. So I think those types of units, will always be naturally affordable to a certain extent, and
And that makes Brantford stronger because we offer these types of housing choices. So perhaps rather than chasing the state methodology, we can also, at the same time we're working on this issue, try to get a better methodology. There's 169 towns around the state have spent quite a bit of time thinking, as you have, about 830G and other approaches, and is there a better way? I don't think anybody's trying to avoid addressing the situation. What they just want is a fair and equitable calculation of the work that's already been done and can be done in the future. So I know that those conversations have been raised, but I think it's got to get to the legislative level and happen there. So encourage you to work in that area.
Yeah, I don't think you could, for 1,000 other units, you'd have to build 10,000, 10% of that, would be 10,000 more units, right? Approximately.
That's how many units we have in town now. That's
Right.
doubling the size.
It's doubling. So does the town get penalized if this quota doesn't get
So there's
met
no
to
place
a
to go but
certain point?
You will continue to be subject to the Affordable Housing Appeals procedure. The housing needs in town that are not being met. I have to be honest with you, I don't know what the future holds. As part of what you heard is Public Act 2129, passed last year, section, I think it was 13 of that act, created a committee on Connecticut's development and future. They were given various areas of research or investigation to report back on, and one of which is these affordable housing plans and the follow-up on those. Now, I don't know what that means. Is that enforcement, or is it, I don't know. So the future, if I can tell you what the stock market was going to do tomorrow, right? So,
I think somebody in that position should have a more solid plan and recognize each town differently and put the efforts in. If they're going to come up with a plan, you should. The state of Connecticut should come up with a better plan than this and sort of adjust to the towns instead of penalizing them and trying to say that there's maybe apartments available in the center of Brantford, which there's not one, by the way.
So the town has said two things, though. The town has said if you don't have 10%, you're subject to the act, so that is a mandate, right? And the second one is each municipality has to address this issue by preparing an affordable housing plan, which is what we've done. To start this conversation. Is it going to solve it and get us to whatever we need to make the, no. But it's going to start this journey, and hopefully the plan needs to be updated every 5 years. A POCD is once every 10. So the state has said, perhaps, you might say, this is twice as important as a POCD. It's that big an issue. So the question is, what can we do? If we're back here 5 years from now and the issue is our numbers are the same, that's unfortunate. We didn't make any progress. And perhaps opportunities passed us by. So it's not that what you have to do, but do what you can do. Can you do something? I think the situation where we're at today.
Where does the fee in lieu go to?
So generally speaking, there are a number of communities around the state that have established housing trust funds, they call it. The Housing Trust Fund is a separate municipal account that accepts grants, bequests, donations, other things like that, that go towards affordable housing. So some towns have open space funds. The money goes to open space preservation. Brantford led the state in terms of establishing a climate resilience fund, which is, we're going to need money in the future to address those issues. So let's start putting money aside today. So this could be a similar type of situation. I know of 2 towns in the state that partially fund their accounts through a zoning permit fee. So when somebody goes to add a deck onto their house and they need a permit for the construction, a zoning permit fee of $10 or whatever. It's a little bit from everywhere, and over time it accumulates. And Fairfield benefited from the fact that Sacred Heart University and Fairfield University undertook major capital programs. And the Housing Trust Fund quickly, over the space of 2 or 3 years, grew to 6 figures.
And how do they apply it once they grow it?
They have been very creative because they have acquired some former Navy housing property, and they are in the process of enhancing the 2 families that are there to get double the number of units in there.
Okay, so.
And they're looking to possibly sell those units out in a home ownership situation so the money comes back and they can use it for something else. The town of New Canaan also has a fund, and they used it to do the pre-design work for their housing authority, to move them to the front of the line to get state and federal funding and do improvements which significantly increased the number of housing authority units there. So I think the question is being creative. It's meant to be seed money to make leverage good things happening. So without that fund, it's much harder. With that fund, it creates opportunities we perhaps didn't know we had.
And Glenn, one of the things you mentioned is there are organizations in town. There is BRIC, the Brantford Interface Housing Coalition, that owns the Ivy Street project, which I believe is 39 units, all of which it's 100% affordable. That's an organization that continues to exist. It includes both representatives from the churches that it started, but also community groups. And I think they're looking to get more housing and looking for sources of funds. So if we have a housing fund that we can help afford that would be something that we could do.
And I think page 36 of the report, Appendix E, actually lists some of the housing-related organizations in Brantford. You're very fortunate to have organizations all working in this area, trying to advance this conversation and these approaches. And that's why they were listed here. The Social Services Department does a great job, and again, other organizations as well. So there's a solid foundation, I think, here to build on.
Any other questions? Can we open up the public? Members of the public wish to comment? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward.
I shouldn't drop it the other way around. No. Sorry, I'm a little shorter than Glenn. Good evening. Thank you very much. I have a couple of specific questions for the commission, but my name is Marianne Amore. I've been before you before on a number of affordable housing things. I was also lucky enough to be part of the working group, the planning steering committee. And I want to say in public how lucky we were to have Glenn Chalder as our principal consultant. It was an extraordinary experience, as you might imagine, having listened to his responses to you tonight. The man knows more about affordable housing in Connecticut than anybody I've ever talked to, including David Fink, by the way. So I have a lot to say. I have a long history with affordable housing. And I heard a couple of things. I think it was and so I just have some, I'm also on the RTM. So just to address your concern about the kids, the children, in the budget, the recent budget vote, it was brought to our attention that over the last 10 years, the population of Brantford schools has gone down 25%. And the budget has gone up 20%. So a few more kids actually might help reduce the cost per child. We are paying a lot for buildings and facilities, and having more kids in town would not, if they came in town through affordable housing, would not be a problem. That said, there's a lot of things known about how the notion of a lot of kids coming in through affordable housing is a persistent myth that I've run into for many years. I think there are really good statistics about this, and I published by the Partnership for Strong Communities. We worked on it. We saw a lot of it in the plan. I think it's 0.4 children for every one-bedroom apartment, set of one-bedroom apartments that are that are deed-restricted affordable. It's 0.4 children, and I think it's 1.7 or something for two-bedroom apartments. So the actual number, this is a kind of persistent myth that a lot of kids are going to come in and we're going to be overrun in our schools, and it doesn't happen. So that's something to know. And if you really want to understand the issues, the two persistent myths are property values drop and there are too many kids. It doesn't happen. There's nothing that supports those contentions. And so, having done this for a long time, I also worked in Old Saybrook just right before the housing bust. And that community, before there was a mandate for a plan, undertook to take some state land that had been reclaimed, and they put up 17, the town itself, with the help of a nonprofit that I worked for, put up 17 affordable units, absolutely beautiful, right near the water. But here's the thing of it, is the median income in Old Saybrook at that point was so high that I, as the director, would have qualified to move into one of those apartments. So that's the other thing. It's not project housing, it's another persistent idea about affordable housing. Glenn said something that I think is very important. We have a community need that I would hope the town approaches with some enthusiasm. I think we have a great solving. We have a great plan, a great set of strategies. One of my questions was, and I was lucky enough to be part of the iterations of those strategies and thinking about it, and getting it here, my question was to you guys, how do you see yourself applying it? Do you see yourself as using it as a real guide to solve a real present need? There are ways of, and I, like you, am frustrated at the naturally occurring affordable housing. Are there ways that we could incentivize deed restricting it? Could we look at property tax breaks on certain kinds of things? There's room for creativity, and I would hope, I don't sense it yet, and maybe I'll be surprised, that this plan becomes really meaningful. Brantford's a great community, and I represent one of the most densely populated districts, the 4th district, Brantford Hills, and up around there. We have the most dense developments in town. That district is roughly twice the density of the overall town. And that section of town is what keeps Brantford's grand list high. All those condos, there's a lot that goes into this. For instance, Glenn also mentioned the reuse of commercial buildings. Right across the street from me, where I grew up, I'm living there again, is the Summit Place development. It's a great example of reuse. It's a very dense development, and it's beautiful, and the traffic is controlled well, and they are voluntarily bringing affordable units to it. I think they're volunteering to that, right, Harry?
Well, in order to get the density that they got for that project, they had to put aside 20% affordable units.
Right, so that
was part of the package. That was the incentive. So they chose to do that. But,
it's an incentive zone.
Yeah.
So what I'm hoping for is that this is not that the commission doesn't see this plan as a burden, but really embrace it enthusiastically, kind of prioritize and filter every application through some of the ideas and strategies, that it is really useful to the commission in solving this community need. You know, I'm living in the house I was born in. It was built in 1950. My parents paid $6,000 for that house, okay? It's 720 square feet. I added 100, okay? It's now appraised, I could get $275,000 for that house. I've made some improvements, but that's the other thing to think about, is that it's not just, is it affordable today, but next week or next month or next year, can the person that's currently living in it afford it? Because there are also no rent protections in place in the state of Connecticut. There's no rent control, no percentage cap on how much rents can go up. It's strictly what the market could bear. I've seen my own relatives who are living in one of those apartments on Mill Plain Road. The rent went up 35%. And there's nothing to tell him, he's a working kid, right? Nothing, and he can't afford it now. There's nothing, no recourse for him in the state to say, that's too much of an increase. So I really beg you to kind of get rid of this myth about public housing and think about it as a community need that needs solving. We're getting older. In 2007, when I was working in Old Saybrook and I had to do all of the kind of assessment of the towns, the median age of Brantford was 42. It's now 47. That's in, what, 12 years? So if you work in a city or live in a city, the median age is, what, 30. And that means that, you know, there's a lot of vitality, a lot of people are going to stick around long, they're going to pay taxes, they're going to work. People who are, if the median age is 47, they're going to be retiring, their incomes are going to go down, their taxes are going to go down. So it's not just, are we building buildings with enough affordable units in it, it's what's the effect on the entire town. So again, I'm going to wrap up by thanking Glenn and Harry and Evan for the opportunity to be part of drafting this plan. I think the changes that were made are fine. And my last appeal is please use it. Please keep it front of mind. I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you for your work on the steering committee. Other members of the public wish to comment? Hearing none, anyone have any further questions?
I have one last question for Glenn. I should have asked it before, Glenn. I apologize. The question is, if all of the naturally occurring affordable housing was allowed to be counted, plus what we have already counted, where would that put us in that percentage? I know we'd be above 10%, but where would we be? I think there was 4,100 units there.
30%?
30%. I mean, the number of naturally occurring affordable housing units is, bear with me just for a second, it was in the presentation, the number is like 2,700 is working. Yeah, so on the bottom of page 7 of the report, it says it's possible. And again, oops, I apologize. It's possible that Brantford has over 5,500 naturally occurring affordable housing units, 2,480 rental units plus 3,074 ownership units. So that's based on census information that's 2 or 3 years old, doesn't reflect the current reality. But if that was the number, if we could agree just for a moment that that's our number, we're really there, that's about 40% of the 13,500 units we have in town.
It's actually pretty high, all things considered.
Again, Brantford is very fortunate. We have, our economic development has been supported by this type of housing. Our retail shops, employees and workers, people who work in town, live in town, it's a tremendous asset for the community. It just doesn't fall within the state guidelines.
Right.
So the issue would be, again, contact our legislative delegation and say we shouldn't be treated the same as communities that have no affordable housing, or that, you know, that There's some below 1%.
It seems like the law makes it a dire need, at least for Brantford, but the numbers don't speak to that.
Well,
I
in
mean,
a sense,
just
they
as
do.
they
What
are.
Mary Ann said is a person in town experienced a 30% rental rate increase over the past year, and the housing market situation is so dire that the answer is, that we're not having a dialogue, or there's not a dialogue in that situation. Somebody's saying your rent's going up 35%. The other side saying, well, hang on a second here, I really can't afford that. The issue is, well, your lease is up and you need to move out because somebody else will take that space. That's so, I mean, I don't think it's at the point we're making homeless people, but there's some significant issues here. People who live in Brantford today who may have lived in Brantford their whole life and they're renting now and they're possibly at risk of losing their place of residence. So there's 1,000 stories, or maybe the 5,500 stories for these types of situations that occur. And I think as Mary Ann eloquently stated, can we find ways to work on this to ensure that there's a diversity of housing choices for people of all ages, incomes, and characteristics? I think that could be something we could work on.
I'm sure we'll be able to find some resolutions to this, but, maybe that guy went up 35% on his rent because the plow went up 40%. The electric went up 45%. The gas went up, and those are expenses. So you either lose the building because of the increase in inflation, or you go up on the rent. You can't just blame.
Yeah, I agree. And there's situations around the state as well where the eviction moratorium, some tenants said, well, if I don't have to pay my rent, I won't. And that created some situations now that landlords also have to recoup money that they didn't get in the past. So we're in a tough situation, supply chain, et cetera. So.
Thanks. Harry?
Yeah, before I close the public hearing, just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping things. Glenn mentioned a short document with several edits for updated demographic information available from, sorry, I've got two of them, it's still not helping. Glenn mentioned there's a short document here on the table, and it has updated information available on monthly gross rents that were discussed earlier in the presentation, and some other updated information. So what is actually being, I would suggest the commission consider modifying the plan that was proposed for public hearing to include that. Also, there's just a couple little edits that have shown up since we put this finalized format on the website and advertised for public hearing. On page 30, there's just a little, it's basically just a margin issue on one of the definitions for median, can fix that. The commission's okay with that. Also, there's an entry for the Brantford Affordable Housing, Inc., and we don't have contact information for that, so we can possibly delete that, even though, we'd like to add that to our working table in-house, but we just don't have an entry for the document at the moment. And the last housekeeping change would be, it's one of the appendices. Fingers are just not functioning really well here. It is the one with the fair housing resolution, so it does not have the most updated one. The town recently, April 21st, 2022, adopted an updated resolution, so if the commission is amenable, we could substitute that in for the one we had on file, have the most recent one in the plan.
Thank you. Anything, we can still talk about this after we close the public hearing, but anything else before we close the public hearing? Yeah, Marianne, something quick? Just make it quick.
I just want to say, the other thing you can be happy about, Commission, is I think the depth of input on this plan. I've known a few other towns where the consultant wrote it, and it'll pass at the state, but this was a plan that really brought people who know what they're dealing with into that process.
Great, and again, thank you again for serving. I know, Harry, you put together a great committee, so
Thank you.
appreciate it. Anything else? Then we can close this matter as a public hearing. Again, this is probably something we'll take up later on about the actual vote to adopt. That brings us then, going through our agenda, items number 2 and 3. This is the Brantford Building Supply, again, the open space residential development on Buckley Road. And this is a matter where we had opened and continued this public hearing for a number of occasions, and I understand the developer, there were a few outstanding things. There was I think there were some drainage issues they were looking at further. They were getting plans and a formula for the maintenance of the swales, and then there were some possible design issues. And in any event, I understand that the developers requested that we continue this matter to our next hearing. Is that correct, Harry?
That is correct. We have a letter dated May 18th from Attorney Amy Suchins for the applicants. They're requesting that continuance to June 2nd. And they're also consenting to a time extension to allow the public hearing to be continued to June 2nd. So you have to accept the time extension and continue the hearing.
Okay, so we'll accept that time extension. So if you're here on that, we ask that you come back when we hear the additional information. You can comment on that. That'll be at our June 2nd meeting. That'll be online. Is that correct, Aaron?
That'll be through Zoom. We've had a recurring meeting link for Zoom, so any of the old agendas prior to, I think we started doing this a couple months ago back in person. But we'll have the agenda online. That will have the Zoom link on it if anyone wants to attend that meeting, or contact us in the Planning and Zoning Office so we can make sure you have the information you need to attend.
Thank you. So that items number 2 and 3 were continued to our June 2nd meeting. Brings us into item number 4, which is a zoning regulation amendment, addition of solar regulations, submitted by Daniel Rabin. I understand that had been opened and we continued. I know Mr. Chadwick had a few comments on that, and is the applicant here?
Thank you. I'm Daniel Rabin. I live on 24 Stone Street in Short Beach. And thank you for hearing this application. The purpose of this application is threefold. One is to capture in the regulations Brantford's practice of supporting solar energy. The second is to promote solar energy consistent with the town's energy plan, which is in turn consistent with the state energy plan. And the third is to provide transparency not only for the commission, but for applicants to make the whole application process simpler, more transparent, and hopefully faster. So I presented about a month ago on April 21st, and as you mentioned, Mr. Chadwick had a question about our figures, why we had certain figures of extension above the ridge line and on flat roofs. And I couldn't really answer it at that time, somewhat to my embarrassment, but we took two approaches. One was to look at zoning regulations from other towns around the state, as well as the proposed regulations from Energize CT. I have to say that they were not very specific in terms of the height requirements, and that exercise did not really yield a lot of good information. We did have discussion with a contractor from Earthlight. This is his name's Stefan Hartman, and he is the national sales manager for Earthlight, and he's also a Brantford resident. So we've had discussions with him on several solar-related topics. And he told us two interesting things. First of all, for peaked roofs, something that I think everybody has observed, either consciously or unconsciously, that the solar panels never really go above the ridge. So we made an amendment to that effect, that solar panels on peaked roofs should not exceed the height of the ridge. The other thing that we learned from him was that on flat roofs, sometimes you see panels that are maybe 3 or 6 feet high, but that is old technology, and with the newer, more efficient solar panels, the solar panels are inclined at about 10 degrees and rarely exceed about 1.5 feet. So in consideration of that, we put the number of 3 feet as a maximum for solar panels on flat roofs. So I have to say that that was, for Mr. Chadwick, that was an extremely insightful question. Why those numbers? And I think that with those justifications, we're comfortable with the new numbers of not exceeding the height of a peaked roof and 3 feet above the level of a flat roof. Mr. Chadwick also made some suggestions in terms of the definitions, and in the draft that Harry Smith has prepared, that's been accounted for. I think all of his suggestions were very insightful. They simplified the whole application, and I have to say that I really appreciate his contributions to it. And from the applicant's standpoint, we'd like to accept those without change. So that's really all I have to say. I'd be happy to take any questions or elaborate. And again, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Harry, do you want to review I think some of the changes were Mr. Ray just referred to, but do you want to go over anything further? Or?
Sure. So just passing around 2 documents. Can everyone hear me okay? This is a little, I don't know how close I need to get to the microphone. That's all right? Okay. So as was mentioned, the first document has a lot of blue on it, basically. And this is a copy of what was submitted by Commissioner Joe Chadwick. He looked at the proposed definitions and some of the wording in the document itself and had some suggested changes. As we just mentioned, Mr. Rabin and myself looked at them. He was perfectly comfortable with them. And what I ended up doing to make it a little clearer is to add to the revised document you got by email a couple days ago all the changes Joe was suggesting in what I received this morning. So I did this afternoon and basically feathered them all in. So if you look at this document that says proposed amendments to Brantford zoning regulations revised through May 19th, 2022. There are changes, the original changes are in red, and the revised deletions, additions are all in blue, and also highlighted in yellow. So just to run through it, in the definitions section, essentially we just replaced what was proposed with what Joe Chadwick's suggesting. So for example, we had 2 definitions in there that were added on. This was done by consultants we had working for the town back when we had some last round of staff changes. Unfortunately I had enough money to pay for the consultant to draft it, but I didn't have enough money to pay for the consultant to come and explain it. So I'm sort of left in the position of trying to explain someone else's work. I think they were thinking of using these 2 definitions, and there was nothing really in the final version of the regulation that used the words fixed rack or fixed tracker. So there's no purpose for having those at all. So those are out. The next 3 were reworked a bit, again, based, I think, on Joe Chadwick's experience of working with these things. And, I can go over them, but frankly, I did not write them. He did. I'm just going to take him at, frankly, his word that he knows what he's talking about. It seemed fairly straightforward to us, and is a way to clearly define what's a solar array, what's a ground-mounted solar array, what's a roof-mounted solar array, small scale versus large scale, and so forth. So those are basically the 1, 2, 3 definitions. The roof and ground-mounted definitions are really wrapped into the definition of solar array itself. On the next page is an excerpt from the use table for residential districts, and this just shows the addition in red of roof-mounted solar arrays and small-scale ground-mounted solar arrays as allowed uses and this criteria in this new section 6.16 they would need to comply with. They would
That's
just,
Not in residential, those are in business and,
no, this is section 3.3, so that's the residential. On the next page is section 4, that's the business and industrial districts.
okay. I guess I expected the residential to have the ends in the piece.
It doesn't. It has basically the listing here. So basically, most of the residential.
Listed as a use, I understand.
Yeah, exactly. It's an accessory use. So this is all, we just had it's going to be an accessory use in the residential districts. I didn't copy the whole table, so it's
Yeah, no, I
just
understand
that. On the following page, page 3, is an excerpt from the use table for the business and commercial zones, industrial zones. And this shows, again, accessory uses, roof-mounted solar arrays, and the small-scale ground-mounted solar arrays. And I can go back for a second just to highlight that the small-scale ground-mounted solar arrays would not be able to exceed an area equal to 1/2 of the footprint of the principal structure. So it's not a lot of square footage. But it could mount up a little bit in the commercial industrial zones with larger buildings, given if they have the ability to, the land to do it. Possibly they could do these things, over parking areas too. That's a possibility. So going back to page 3, as accessory uses, these would all be just through staff approval. That's what the P is for, as of right permitted use. We looked again at the large-scale ground-mounted solar arrays with respect to some of the comments raised about drainage. I don't think we're, at least I wasn't, and I think we really hadn't time to do enough research to come up with enough answers to feel comfortable in addressing comments that were raised earlier about allowing these to go forward right now. So I think we'd need to do a little more homework before we and come up with some more standards to handle larger kind of these solar farms. The ones you folks could end up seeing, should you want to go ahead with them, would be sort of intermediate level, because for a solar farm that generates more than 1 megawatt of power, they are regulated by the state, and I believe the state regulation preempts local control. That's a pretty large facility, though. I mean, the facility that was just built at the Tabor property, that, my understanding, does not quite generate 1 meg. They kept it under 1 meg. They didn't want to go through the state process. But that's a pretty sizable, you look on even like a Google map, you can see it. It takes up maybe 1/5 of the whole Tabor property, something like that. It's pretty large. So at this point, we just, that's why the SEs are all crossed out and Ns are put in. For now, that would just be not allowed at all. So we give it us opportunity to look at it again and come up with some more complete consideration of it, and whatever criteria we think we'd suggest you consider adopting in the regs for that. Going on to page 3 in the bottom, as was mentioned by Mr. Rabin, for the roof-mounted solar arrays, changed the allowance to go 2 feet above, actually, excuse me, it was a foot above the highest point of the roof ridge line. And learning a little bit more about how these things are actually put up, I mean, I could not find any that were above the roof ridge line. So we just have some wording changes here to limit it so that they would not extend above the roof ridge line. And then reworked on 1616BC. Joe Chadwick suggested some wording just to allude to the Connecticut State Building Code and the fire prevention and fire safety codes. In no way is the commission or the zoning enforcement officer, I think, by this being put in a position of enforcing the codes, but it's sort of letting folks know you got to comply with the codes. So if they read the reg and they don't know about the code for whatever reason, so they're just not surprised they got to comply with the building code. And the last change on page 4, Joe was suggesting just taking out this criteria that would limit the small-scale ground-mounted solar arrays in commercial and industrial zones to parcels with a structure. I mean, that could be a situation where, for example, we actually, before Zen completed their decision to move to West Hartford, they had a food truck, as you may know. They were looking at a couple of vacant commercial spots and properties in town. They were looking at a couple of lots. And it would have been possible for them to actually locate the food truck, and they could have had a parking lot around it and basically a restaurant operating, but it wouldn't actually be a structure. It would just be a food truck, and maybe they wanted solar, some kind of solar installation along with that. So if you took that out, that would allow that. To keep it in, you're precluding it. So we're just taking it out, making it a little more permissive. That is it, and I think there were a couple of editorial changes here. They're really wording changes, when I took the words from Joe Chadwick's comments, it was in a PDF, and the character recognition, I lost some of the fine detail. So it just sort of translates it into text, but doesn't do it completely accurately. So under small-scale ground-mounted solar array, the words foot and print should be one word, of course. Let's see. I had my email about the other ones. And there's just a wording order error on page 3 under 616B, 1B. So that's the first section that's got some yellow on it down at the bottom of the page. It should read the highest point of the solar panel array, not the solar array panel.
Harry, quick question.
Sure.
When you say ground-mounted, like they have these new things that they're using that you could drive on, these new solar systems, you can actually drive on them. Would that be exempt from this? Like, say you wanted to do
Like in
a
the
street?
pavement or something?
Yeah, and these are newer systems that are coming about, and I think a lot of towns and states are going to probably eventually start using this because they don't have to be repaved, and
This is news
and you
to me.
save a
I don't
lot
know
of
how,
money.
how they would, I can certainly check with the town engineer's office about that. At this point, I would consider them covered by, let's look at the definition to make sure.
so I think that's you don't want to eliminate possible ground coverage that replace tar and create energy.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they wouldn't be covered, not to say they couldn't be in the future, but I think we've been going sort of back and forth here for, well, over a month, probably longer before we got to the commission. And, this is an evolving field.
Oh, yeah.
So things are happening fast. This just gets us in the game, I think, to definitely state on the record these things are allowed. They're allowed as accessory uses. So I think probably back to the commission with, latest developments and tweaking this thing in the future. We're just going to have to keep addressing new things as they come up. It's just going to be the nature of the beast.
It's getting better.
Yeah, I think it is.
We'll keep an
There's a
open
lot going
mind.
on. So there is one more typo. It's the word media should be medium, and that is in the definition of
First page.
the first one. So if you went 1, 2,
Under
3,
solar
4, the
array.
fourth line down on solar array, it's on the left side. Media is plural, and he's really talking about medium. I think the word's a little generic. I mean, they really intended to cover some of the old style heat transfer type of arrays where the array itself would heat up, a tube of water or some other kind of fluid that would take that energy down and sort of heat hot water or, transfer it to the house in some other ways. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's all I've got. I just wanted to sort of go through those edits.
Thanks, Harry. Questions from anyone before we open it to the public?
I have a quick question. So the 3-foot height, how does that compare to the height setback? Does it have to be within the height setback for the zone? Or is it exempt from the height setback?
It'll be within the height setback.
So,
Yeah.
say you have a situation
At the
where,
moment. Let me double check that though.
you know, somebody's having to get above the flood elevation and
Yep.
are pushing that limit, doesn't that kind of preempt them from doing solar on their buildings?
Well, I believe you're allowed to go, I'll have to look at that, above the height limit for the flood. When you raise your house for flood purposes, there's a section in there. It could take me a minute, I could dig it out.
For solar, you're saying, if it's?
No, you're talking about like raising a house for, trying to get above the
I'm just thinking
flood
of an
elevation.
example where a house is going above the flood elevation, or they're doing an improvement and they're
Yep.
pushing that upper restriction because they're in flood zone, and they want to do solar, is the, you know, the 3-foot or whatever, you know, say they did a contemporary house with a flat roof, you know, is the 3 feet part of the height setback, or is it exempt?
All right, this is a whole paragraph here on non-conforming structures that are fully in compliance with FEMA regulations, may be raised or otherwise modified, only to the extent necessary to achieve compliance with such regulations. District. We may have to look at that. So, you know, at this point, I think it would potentially be a problem if it's a flat roof.
Well, yeah, I just wouldn't know how that would be handled, and
Yeah.
I just think it should specify included or not. I mean, maybe, you know, if they go over the height because of it, you get a variance or something, you know.
Well, you can certainly do that, but
Right.
we may want to do something else.
Mark, are you saying you think the panel is going to be 3 foot straight up?
Well, there's language in here
Because
that.
you said it's on an angle.
It
No,
would be
they're
on an
just saying
angle.
it can extend 3 feet above.
The overall height. I
The
think the
overall.
panel's 3 feet, but it's not 3 feet this way, it's 3 feet this way. It's only, I think, a foot off the roof.
Well, I think it probably wouldn't be, I think it was said not more than 1.5 feet off the flat
Right.
roof. But we just proposed 3 to cover, if there's a larger panel, it might go a little higher than that.
I was wondering if Marcy was thinking that if this was a flat roof, the panel was standing more up, you know, upward and consuming 3 feet, whereas opposed to being on a 10% angle and it's only up maybe a foot off the roof.
I'm just thinking of those occasions where the house is being challenged by the current height setback
Right.
because they're in a flood zone, and it's, you know, a consideration as they're trying to
So you say if
expand or
they're
raise their
35
house.
What do you say, so if they're 35 feet already, just
Yeah,
with
if
the height
they're-
of the house,
If their new house is at 35 feet and it happens to have a flat roof where they want to put, you know, a solar panel, whether it's 1 foot off or 3 feet off, it's going over that, you know,
Yeah.
jurisdictional height point. I just don't know if it's considered.
Do we
Part of,
exclude
you know.
cupolas and things? I thought there was.
We do exclude a bunch of things,
So
yeah.
we could easily exclude the
We could.
solar.
We
if
could,
it's-
but we haven't, but yeah. but-
Yeah,
That-
and I can look
that's
at that and come back with a modification to this. But we are sort of at the end of the public hearing timeframe.
Yep.
And, you know, we could always be tweaking this, unfortunately. It's a good point, now I'm writing it down, and we'll deal
Whatever
deal
you
with it, yeah.
decide, I don't have a preference one way or the other.
Yeah.
I just thought the distinction needed to be made.
No, it's a good point, it's a very good point.
Anything else? Did I open up the public? I forget.
No. I know.
Okay. Any member of the public wish to comment? One more time, any member of the public wish to comment? Hearing none, then any other comments from anyone? Thank you, Mr. Robin. Any further comments or?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Then we'll close this matter as a public hearing. Great, thank you. Brings us then to item number 5, which is Sunrise Cove Association. This is zoning regulation amendment to amend section 3.3A and add a new section 3.5 regarding pre-existing summer cottage campsite. Again, this is a public hearing that we have opened and continued And the applicant has requested that we continue this to our June 2nd remote meeting. Is that correct, Gary?
Essentially, yes.
Okay, so then for item, if you're here, it doesn't look like anyone's here on that because people are vacating, but, so we will continue item number 5 to our meeting on June 2nd. Again, that is a remote meeting. Brings us into item number 6, which is Robert and Elena McLean, applicants and owners for 26 Old New England Road, a special exception, single-family house. Is the applicant ready to proceed on that one?
Hi, my name is Bob McLean, owner applicant. We're here seeking approval to build a single-family house inside the 100-foot buffer of the wetland. Basically, there's the only place the house could go on the property, you know, with the survey and the wetland on the property. So,
Thank you. Evan, did you do the staff report on this one?
I did. Like Mr. McLean stated, they propose a single-family home within the 100-foot buffer of the inland wetland. They received a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals on March 15th because, like he also said, they had to position it to be outside of that, or as far as it could be from that inland wetland. It's also an interior lot, therefore they had 50-foot setbacks. They have not provided a landscaping plan, however, existing plant materials could be used to meet these landscaping requirements. They meet the off-street parking requirements. No lighting information has been submitted, nor was a soil or erosion sediment control plan. However, they did note some erosion control measures on the submitted site plans. This lot is an interior lot. Section 611 regulates these types of lots, and Section 611D states a landscape buffer may be required by the commission along the access way. If the commission chooses to do so, we have added a condition of approval that we do with this. Section 611E also states that all utilities shall be installed underground. It looks like the plans do indicate that the water line will be underground, but we asked the applicant to confirm whether or not the electricity would be underground.
correct.
There would
Correct,
be?
and yes, the utilities will be underground.
Great, thank you. Based on the application materials presented, it appears they satisfied the special exception criteria, and the applicant received approval from the Inland Wetlands Commission on February 10th. The applicant also proposes to regrade a portion of their neighboring properties so that they could meet the driveway grade requirements, and they have submitted to us 2 signed letters from their neighbors that they submitted to the Inland Wetland Commission stating that they grant permission for the McLeans to do so. We have added a condition that would require a construction and maintenance easement to be submitted to the town planner and reviewed by the town attorney prior to the start of any construction. And Mr. McLean has also had his attorney contact us to at least get an understanding of what they were looking for. So it seems like that's something they were willing to do. And finally, staff recommendations. We have 2 findings, first of which is the commission, if they decide to do so, finds that the presented materials satisfy the special exception criteria. The second is existing vegetation is considered to meet the landscaping requirements. And our conditions are prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy or a certificate of zoning compliance, the following shall be addressed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement officers. Erosion control measures shall be installed, and a copy of that construction and maintenance easement shall be delivered to them and approved by the town council. Condition number 2, prior to the issuance of a zoning permit or building permit, all conditions of the Inland Wetland Commission approval shall be demonstrated to be satisfied, and if you choose to do so, vegetated buffer shall be provided along the access way.
Thank you, Evan. Questions from commission members? Mr. McLean, have you looked at the staff report, and do you have any comments on the conditions?
No, my
You-
engineer has an erosion plan.
Right.
And it's, I have a plan here that he sent. He was unable to attend tonight due to a conflict of scheduling. No, I have no other questions.
Okay. What about the vegetated buffer? Is that okay?
We do have a planting plan for inland wetland, you know, a scheduled planting that they require, the wetland, because of the disturbance. So there is a planting plan for the whole property.
Been done with wetland, so I
Is-
don't know if
does
that's
that-
the same thing that comes over here. It's all in
I
the
do-
wetlands office. I don't know.
I think it was along the access way. Is that the
And
same
down,
location?
and down where the wetland
But what,
No.
was there plantings along the accessway in the proposed plan?
No, just to hydro seed immediately to stop erosion. That was the planting, you know, on the each side of the driveway.
from the soil scientists who put
Right.
all that in
Sure.
at the
Okay.
wetland. I don't have that here.
Mhm.
It's with wetland. I don't know.
Well, no,
Sure.
yeah.
And it sounds like whatever wetlands required, they're requiring a right.
Yeah,
And this was something separate, which frankly, I think we have discretion whether to require, which is along the access way, a vegetated buffer, which I don't know. So, you know.
Is there existing vegetation now where you're not doing any grading? Is
no,
it like-
it's a wooded lot. It's a wooded access. Some trees will have to be removed.
So between
there's-
house 28 and where the silt fence line is here, are there trees here?
There's trees and vegetation and all.
Sure.
So between here and here, are there trees in here?
This is the property line here.
Right.
Okay, there's trees here. Basically, his grass comes over into here now.
Yeah, I'm trying, you don't own this property?
no.
So what does he have for landscaping here? That's
Grass. And the trees are right on the line, you know.
So you've got sort of a line of trees
Yeah.
that will be affected by the grading? Let me
If
see.
they might be. I mean, some of the
You're gonna
trees
be
are gonna have to come down.
Okay. Yeah, to clear your way in.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, your availability for space to plant on your property is limited. I would think that the neighbor would naturally perhaps do some kind of buffer, but I don't know if you have any agreements to do that. And I guess that my other question is, did wetlands require you to do a buffer along this
They're
line
gonna,
behind the house?
Wetlands is gonna allow us to use the rocks on the property to create a distinction between the wetland and.
I do not cross line?
Right.
Okay.
And maybe a couple signs, he said, but the rocks will be, instead of a fence.
Oh, yeah, but did they ask you to put any plants in there, or is there vegetation? What is the vegetation behind the house?
I have a
Do you have any
whole
photos?
planting. Right now?
Yeah.
It's all wooded.
So it's all wooded up to here?
Yes.
Okay.
The whole lot is all wooded.
Yeah, so this would stay wooded because you're not going
Yeah,
into it?
right.
Okay. I just didn't know if you're adding any plants along that
Right
edge.
at like 50 trees that wetland requires. We had to-
50?
Yeah, like bushes and shrubs.
Shrubs, okay.
Yeah, that, we had to hire a soil scientist and all his recommendations from the
Okay.
state that.
To,
No, I do have
to
a
control
plan.
that edge, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So
Yep.
to me, that's a very significant cost and
Oh, yeah.
endeavor for planting.
We have a big
Right.
bill for
We
that.
do have a planting plan for the whole
Okay.
back to
Okay.
buffer for the,
Okay.
and wetland
We
required.
have to bond it.
And it has to be inspected
Right.
for 5 years and 85%
Right.
survival.
So the only planting that doesn't specifically meet our regulations is along the driveway, Harry or
Yeah.
Evan?
It's
Or-
not that it wouldn't meet it if they don't provide it. I think it's, the commission gets to decide whether or not they want to require it.
Oh, okay.
Do-
Okay, I'm just trying to understand what the reg is saying as far as the interior lot, if, you know, because I know there's, one of our regulations is a certain percentage around the house or what have you, but to me, the extensiveness of the planting along the wetlands is a significant contribution to that end.
Sure. And this specific standard isn't in our landscaping section. It's actually in the interior lot section. But I did add that finding that the existing vegetation will
Or
act as,
substantial.
yeah, exactly. Will act as meeting those landscaping requirements of section 6.3.
So what's we need to decide whether to leave condition 2B in, which is a vegetated buffer shall be provided along the access way. What do you think?
I would give them relief just because my sense of what the soil scientist has probably proposed is probably very extensive.
have his report right here.
Okay, so there's,
Okay, yeah, I mean, I just know based on the industry what he's probably doing,
It's a whole report from him.
yeah. Who was the soil scientist?
David Lord.
Oh, yeah. So he's got
And
pin oak,
Lord,
sweetgum, amelanchier, viburnum, elderberry, high bush. Yeah, I mean, there's a substantial understory. Yeah. I just can't see, it's such a narrow area. I think I think there'll be naturally occurring landscaping that will evolve
right, and you
in
point
there.
out it's narrow, maybe the neighbor put some on theirs.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from anyone?
Can I just check
Gary?
a second? Do you have a copy of that plan today,
The planting?
other than what's on your phone?
The report.
It was submitted to Wetland.
Right, we just don't have it
I
technically in
don't
our
have it
file,
with me.
but, so.
Is it in your phone?
It's in my phone.
Should be forwarded to me this evening.
Well, if Wetlands has it, we can just
It's
grab
on
a
the
copy.
file.
from
That's
them.
fine, we just consider it part of the application if you want, I
Right,
suppose.
okay.
As long as you're all aware of basically what it consists of.
No, I would've got it.
No, that's okay.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so we'll take out 2B, which is vegetated buffer
Yeah, that's-
shall be provided along that.
You guys,
access way.
yeah.
Okay,
That's fine.
okay, great. Okay, let's open up the public. Any member of the public wish to comment? Hearing none, we can close the public comment. Any further comments by anybody? Applicant? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close this matter as a public hearing. We'll take this up in a little bit. Thank you. So then, let's go now to our minutes. We had minutes from our October, what am I, Octobers?
Wow, it took a long
Yes.
time getting those prepared. huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Good.
From our
Good
May
to it, you
5th
guys.
meeting, and they were sent with a packet, and I think, Terry, there were a couple, I believe,
Yeah, there was one typo on page 3 of 8. There's a reference under item 5 to continue without testimony, the 5/5/22 meeting. It should have said the 5/19/2022 meeting. I think that's all I had. Actually, I got it from you, so that's all I noted down, though.
Yeah, I think one other thing is, I noticed in the commissioners present and absence, I didn't see Massimo's name as either present or absent. I think Massimo
Was absent.
was absent at the last meeting, so we should add him
We'll add
as
him.
absent at the front. So any other corrections or additions? Now, someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes of our May 5th, 2022 meeting with those two corrections?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved by Fred, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Marcy. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence?
We've got a couple of communications. One is regarding a cell tower at 190 Totucket Road. This is just basically a notice that they're going through Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act process. And they're asking if the commission would want to comment on it. Actually, it's really sent to the department, not the commission, but I brought it to you anyway. So this is, I think, an installation for Tilcon. It seems to be located down pretty far below where the Brantford trolley parking lot is, and that comes off, so it's pretty much interior to the facility. But I guess due to the historic nature of where they're proposing it, they need to go through that process. So it probably is no need to comment on it because I don't think it really affects anybody else. But I don't know what that historic resource might be, what the impact might be. So I can look into it a little bit if you like, but there's not a whole lot of time. But
Okay. Well, if you find anything, send us an email.
I will do it. And there's another communication from the Connecticut Siting Council about looks like another equipment swap at cell tower at 150 North Main Street. That's it.
Okay, great. So then, let's go back to our public hearing items that we can consider. The first was the proposed affordable housing plan that we've reviewed, Mr. Chalder summarized, and we had, I think, some healthy discussions about how we may be able to implement some of these things and got a better understanding of how the state law works and natural affordable housing and all that, all of which are very good comments. But I guess the thing we got to do now is we're supposed to adopt this plan by June 1st. And so we have the draft here, and there were a few corrections, I think, that Harry, you had highlighted were sent out in additional pages. I think, again, there's things we need to do, but the first thing we need to do is adopt the plan, I think. So, are there further comments that anyone wants to make about this?
I did have one comment. That
Sure.
I was just going to say that, I see often that a lot of the single-family housing, it's very hard for young families to enter into the community because of the costs, because we're running out of land, and that's why the condos, even though everybody says there's so many, have become such an affordable option for ownership for young families. That said, we obviously aren't gaining more land, and the land that we have left, I think, puts some certain amount of pressure on sensitive ecological resources, as we've seen in many applications. And, I don't know if this plan should make mention or just consider the fact that densities may need to increase in locations or height or whatever to help accommodate future housing needs or expansion in the community. And I just, to me, that's where my thinking is going as far as future planning with this and with other development. I don't know if that's something that the commission needs to address at some point.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to do it in the plan per se.
I don't know if it's here, but
Yeah, right, absolutely, as a topic, absolutely.
it's just sort of an observation that as it lends to this, and I'm sure Mr. Chalders has represented. I haven't read it cover to cover yet, but I'm sure you can pull that information out, but I just thought I'd make that statement.
It's a 4-year, Massimo Laverty, it's a 4-year moratorium for, is there any way we could use that in lieu of to give incentives to landowners, like for trailers maybe, or tax breaks or something, that we could go approach these people and say, hey, look, if you make this moratorium and if you do this and you sign and you're at that price point anyways,
Right.
can we bring you in? I mean, we're talking about a 20% yes rate on 5,000 houses. That we'll meet our quota pretty soon.
Right. Massimo, that's a good suggestion. That's one of the things in the plan, is that we give a tax break for deed restriction if someone is, likely, if the market is frankly at the 80% level, they may, say, hey, this is a way to make some cash. So yeah. But I think in order to do that, that would have to be through the RTM, and frankly, there'd have to be state authority to do it. I assume there is, but we don't have authority to give tax breaks as a zoning commission. That's the assessment, that's the finances for the town, but we could recommend it.
So who do we approach, the RTM?
Well, I mean, I think, you may want to step back and look at what's recommended in the plan. I mean, I would suggest probably post-adoption, contact members of the steering committee. It was a very, very informed, representative, I think, group of interest in affordable housing in the town. There's no one perspective. There were a variety of different perspectives on the issue. I think maybe to have a joint meeting with that group and the commission and sort of go through what the recommendations were and start to tease out where you might want to go. I think it's going to take a lot of discussion rather than just sort of shoot, oh, that's a good idea. I mean, there's not this, I think it's a great idea, but I think there's a lot of things to look at
between here and there,
in terms of what's the first step, what's the second step, what's the third step kind of thing. And it's going to be an evolving, discussion too. I mean, I don't see this as a static document. I don't think the state intends it to be static because it's required to be modified every 5 years. So it's going to have to be flexible. I think as part of that, there's really probably should be an ongoing committee sort of focusing on the issue that the commission could interface with. You know, and that may be many members of the steering committee, maybe other folks, but I think that may be, you know, first step is to start working through all the recommendations and start thinking about what you might want to tackle as a commission and have some discussion with that steering committee, because there's a wealth of knowledge in that group, there really is. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I think that was one of the recommendations of the plan, that we have an ongoing committee that looks at it, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Chuck, I think our town is, I want to say, an outstanding job, but I think we're on the right track, what we're doing. I think every time we've had an applicant come before us, I think we give it a lot of consideration. And we know that the applicant, especially if they want to do affordable housing, you know, directly to the state, they leave that to come to us, basically. But I think we're on the right track, all things considered. I think kind of, Glenn, in my mind, verified some things I was thinking about, which was the goals that are set, not because anybody's after Brantford. It's just, it is what it is. The layout of the numbers. It would be, I don't say impossible, but near impossible to attain. But I think we're on the right track, because when someone comes in, and I think, you know, use the last example with you, the applicant said, I want to put 5%, and he said, how about 10%? And he said, yes. So I think that's a good way of not, you know, discouraging other people from wanting to come into town and develop, knowing that there's a fair path. And I think that's our job, is to find that fair path. I mean, if we were so negligent that we had no natural occurring affordable housing, that's a different story. But we do have that. I think it's a cushion. It doesn't meet the criteria of the law, but it is a cushion to know that we do have that in place. We have mobile homes, that's part of that. We have condos, that's part of it. So we have the structure in place. And will we ever be able to compete with the developer or the home builder who's coming in? Because, you know, basically a one family or a single dwelling kind of community. Will we ever meet that thing? I don't know. I'm skeptical, unless the state, as Glenn said, would change regulations that said, hey, if you have natural affordable housing, we can give you some credit. We're not giving you 100%, but maybe, you know, every 2 years is worth another point toward you, whatever. So I think that we have all the kind of the ammunition to make this thing a success. The law won't allow us at this point. I think we're more strung by the law, the way it was written. And I realize the law's got to be uniform for every town, whether you're Greenwich or you're Brantford or you're New Haven, doesn't make a difference. But I think we're on the right path. I really do. I really think we're on the right path. I think we should continue what we're doing. I agree with and matter of fact, I would recommend that we accept the plan, because I think in the end, if we again pursue it the way we're going, we're never going to get there, but we'll be on the right path to make it better.
Thanks, Fred. Any other comments?
Can I make a motion?
Sure. Make a motion to adopt the plan, including the updates, right? And Harry, what?
So it would be the
and there were
updates
some
in
typos, I
that
think.
few-page document. There were 2 typos, I believe, and swapping out the 2022 Fair Housing Resolution for the one that's the placeholder in the plan.
Right. So with that, with those changes, again, the correction of the typos, the updates, and swapping out the most recent data. So
I make that motion as presented.
Okay, motion made. Do we need an effective date or anything? Or do we have to publish, you know, there's any of that nonsense?
Before June 1st.
I mean.
Well, how about May 31st? Technically, we've done it by June 1st.
Yeah, when, I mean, it's.
I can't remember. I don't think we need to publish. We just need to put the notice of decision in the paper with like a normal decision.
What I've been doing is encouraging communities, we'll put the adoption date on the front. And then I think to follow the OPM procedure, I think I emailed it to you on May 2nd.
We need to send it to the state,
if you will. It's not a typical planning and zoning application, so you have to post it on the internet website of the municipality, but not typically publishing a legal notice. It's not specified in the statute. On the other hand, if you're publishing other legal notices,
I think there's something about every action of the planning commission, the planning part of the Planning and Zoning Commission needs to be actually noticed in the paper, so we'll do that anyway.
I think
So-
you should just follow your normal procedure for
Yeah.
regular, and that way we've covered the bases.
When would it be published? When would the notice be?
It would be within 15 days, so it comes out in whatever version of the sound paper, so it's probably, actually June 2nd,
Okay.
but we can
Which
move
is the
that
next meeting,
up.
isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
we
the
can
pro-
move that up and,
It's not a
But I don't-
typical planning and zoning application in terms of the effective date has to
Right.
be.
yeah, so I
It's not.
Okay.
I
Do you
don't
want
think
to
we even
save-
have an effective date. It's effective when it's adopted, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
the state is asking you to report the adopted date.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what do you want for a date? Tonight? I
Tonight,
mean,
yeah,
Okay.
effective as adopted, when adopted.
Okay. Okay, so a motion has been made to adopt the plan with the revisions and the corrections and the updated data, effective as of the time of the vote. Is there a second?
As of today.
Right.
Yeah.
Second?
Second.
Second by Joe. Any further discussion? All those in favor, we're all voting?
Aye.
Last one you voted, yeah. Okay, so, okay, so that's that. So then,
Okay.
next one is the solar regs. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So, I think the idea for this is, we've been working on it, we're probably gonna have to revise it again, but it'd be helpful to get something on the books. So, Harry, you just wanna review with us?
Are there any deadlines for this?
No, we closed the hearing, and, you know, we have 65 days to decide, or,
Yeah.
no, we don't even, we have, no, it's not a commission amendment, so we do have 65 days.
Right.
So,
Right.
but why not, let's get it off our
Oh,
agenda.
yeah, no, I just was, I didn't know if it was regulated the same way as the affordable.
Oh, no, it's not the affordable housing plan, that has to be done by June 1st, this is just
No, this is.
private application.
Right, right.
This is just a townwide venture.
Yeah, so, Harry.
I would suggest just referring to the proposed amendments revised through May 19th, 2022, with the,
Some typos. I
there were a
think.
couple of typos, and I'll go over them again. Under the definition of solar array on the fourth line, changing media to medium. In the definition of small-scale ground-mounted solar array, correcting footprint to read as one word. And under proposed section 616B, 1B, change the wording solar array panel to solar panel array. And I believe that is it.
Okay. And for this one, we do need the effective date to be
Right.
after the date of publication,
Right.
so.
For this one, I would suggest, let's say June 6th.
And can we add that the height, since we have height requirements, can we add that, about the setback?
It would kind of probably be out of the parameters of the Public Hearing Act, because we didn't actually put changing that section. So I
Okay.
think they probably, I'll look at it to be absolutely sure I think it works, but probably add the solar panel to the list of exemptions, like
Right,
chimneys,
that's-
aspires, or whatever, and I could just come back with that at some point.
Because it
That's
seems like.
We didn't
I mean,
advertise, so it's technically,
But isn't it part of the same,
no, that, changing that
because they would have had a
section of
chance to
regs-
review it prior to the meeting, is that the issue?
Yeah, it's due process thing.
Okay.
Okay, then someone will make a motion to approve the text amendments regarding solar arrays. Again, it's the document entitled Proposed Amendments to Brantford Zoning Regulations, and it's revised through May 19th, 2022, with the corrections and additions of the typos that Harry just mentioned, with the finding that it's consistent with the plan of comprehensive, consistent with the comprehensive plan and also consistent with the with our plan of conservation development with an effective date of June 6, 2022. Someone want to make that motion?
And with the goals and policies, the Coastal Management Act, and we did
Yeah,
send
yeah,
it
that
to
too.
the- and they were
It's
fine.
also consistent with the goals and policies of Coastal Management Act, because it's a damn application.
Yeah.
So moved.
So moved by Fred, is there a second? Second by Marcy. Further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so that's adopted, and then the next one is Mr. McLean's application for the special exception for the single-family home. And I think, we're going to dig up Evan's staff report there, made the staff recommendation and findings that Evan went over with that. That's on page 5 of the staff report that Evan reviewed with us. And then there were the 2 findings that it complies with regulations, and the 2 conditions that Evan reviewed with us. And I think what we're deleting is 2B. We had 2B was that a vegetated buffer shall be provided along access ways. So we're taking that out. And right, and the other ones are the standard ones, frankly, are in there. So that's again the written staff report that's dated prepared for our meeting of May 19th for application number 22-3.8. So if someone wants to make a motion to approve this application with the findings and conditions in the staff report, again deleting 2B.
So moved.
So moved by Joe. Is there a second?
Yeah, Marcy.
So second. I just been voting on.
Marcy seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Congratulations.
Good luck.
Okay, good luck.
And just to be clear, the solar regs, the effective date was 6/6/22?
June 6th.
Okay, great.
Yeah. That wasn't you, that was the prior application. That was the solar reg.
I'm just catching up.
I know,
Yeah.
will you be emailing?
You will get a letter, a formal approval letter,
Okay,
and special exception needs to be filed in the land records.
once we get it.
Yeah, once you get
Right,
it.
do you have the staff report?
Yeah, I have it on an email. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because that's what it looks like, yeah. So we took out the 2B.
One of the questions was that temporary construction easement,
Mhm.
we're still going to have the lawyer draw that up?
Yeah, your attorney said, once it's approved, he can look at the conditions and then write up
It's-
the
yeah,
necessary
so it's gonna be
documents.
A temporary construction easement allow us to properly grade off for,
I don't know if
To the
it's
roadside.
temporary.
why would it be a permanent?
Well, because you're going to maintain that grade.
It's just going to be
Give you
planted as
permission
grass
to-
and become their
Right.
We'll go back to
yard,
the,
so really,
Well, they won't be allowed, if it's permanent, then
We
you,
don't want
well, you're not going to change the grade. You know, it locks the grade in because the grade and the road all work together. You need the
Right, I
grade
understand that.
changes to make it
Right.
work. So it just says, here, you have permission to, that grade has to stay the way it is, the way it's shown on the plan. They can't change the grade in the future.
no, I understand.
So
So
what do
it's
we ask for is what I'm asking.
the lawyer.
The lawyer wants to know. what-
Have your attorney contact
Yeah,
us
yeah,
and
we can
we'll,
explain to them.
we'll get this.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I'll have him call, and then, because he did a draft already, and he's just waiting to,
Cool.
See what happens
Okay,
here.
yeah.
yep.
basically, it's a requirement on the land record that says you can't change the grade beyond what's shown in the plan. And because it affects the neighbors, that's where it's called an easement.
Right.
Okay.
It'll give you permission to go and establish the grade and obligate them to maintain it
Do I have to
and
have
not change it.
So,
No.
we,
Oh, good.
we maintain it after that? Or no, it just becomes natural?
Yeah, it just will stop them from altering it, that's all.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah,
no problem.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, turning into old business, item number 1 was 16 Business Park Drive. This was, I think, a patio and landscaping to the Thin Island Brewery, and that's been withdrawn. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that may be back, it's withdrawn from now. Item number 2 is also withdrawn. It's a site plan restaurant convenience store at 230 East Main Street. Maybe they may be back, but that's withdrawn.
Where's that?
It's the sort of blue box building, kind of across from Dunkin' Donuts.
Which Dunkin' Donuts?
The one past the high school. on
Oh,
East Main Street.
okay. That's a residential, mixed
It's
use.
a little residential and it's
Yeah.
mostly office, yeah.
Yeah, it's sold, I guess, right?
Don't know.
I know what you're talking
And then item number 3 and 4 are, that's coming up next, at our next meeting, public hearing on the hybrid marijuana, the hybrid cannabis establishment, a change in the regulations and also special exception to allow that. And that's coming up at our next meeting. And then item number 5 also is a public hearing at our next meeting, a special exception for modification at our 2-family home. So that brings into new business, and we received a couple there that's just received. That's on Church Street, that application site plan. I think they've been before us for a couple things, and they're coming in for a site plan now. And I think that we just received that. And then item number 2, so probably at our next meeting or whenever staff can review that. Item number 2 is the Thimble Islands 2-lot subdivision coastal site plan, and that's probably going to be at the second meeting in June.
Yeah, probably the 16th.
Okay. That brings us then to other business, planners report. Harry.
Planners report. Sent an email out to everyone. Hopefully you all got it, with basic communication from the Coastal Vulnerability Working Group, which has been sort of underway for maybe a year and a half now. They wanted to come and basically give you folks an update of what they've been up to, the information they put together. So there's a link on there for the first of, I think they're looking at this as a 3-part presentation. We did talk about how to go about this, and rather than soak up a lot of time at meetings, they thought maybe the easiest thing to do is give you all the link. Everyone individually can review the presentation, and then at some point, once that's all happened, maybe possibly in July, we could set up a meeting with and invite them, whether we have time on the regular agenda or possibly even a special meeting for an hour or two. And they're looking for some interactive discussion once you have more of an idea of what they've done, what their thoughts are about climate change, sea level rise, and coastal vulnerability. The town did do a whole report on this, coastal resilience, going back maybe about 4 or 5 years now. So there was a presentation that was actually, I think, taped by BCTV and identified a lot of the town's infrastructure that might be vulnerable to sea level rise and what we might need to be doing as a town for our own public works, as well as issues with how to protect the coast and private property and so forth. So there's a whole lot of issues involved with it, as you might imagine, following it at all. And they've gotten into a lot of it, just sort of looking for some feedback about what their, in terms of what their thinking's been, and looking for some direction, I think, too. So.
When did you send it? Is it just this?
I can't remember. It is just that.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is it's a 1-pager.
And there's a link on the document, so that if you don't have the email, let me know, because it's the only way you're going to be able to get at it is through.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I have it, because a lot of the things still come through as PDFs for the
I
links.
think this was just in an email,
In a
so
link?
it should be all right.
Okay.
But let me know if you don't have the email.
Do you know what it was titled?
I don't know if I brought the copy of the email with me tonight. Let's see. I just have it.
Are we on a 100-foot sea level rise protection plan right now, or something like that? I always
I think it was a number of maybe 20 inches by 2050 was the sort of planning projection I think we had in our plan of conservation development. I'm not sure if that's correct at the moment, though. So. Yeah, I didn't bring the email I sent to you folks with me, unfortunately, but why don't I just send it again, and I'll ask for everyone to reply to me that you got it.
Was it recently? Because I don't think I
It
have
was. It was like within the last week.
Yeah, I don't think I got it.
Or it might have been last week, but
Special meeting.
I'll just send it again, and I'll
Yeah,
just send
I'd like to
return
save
receipt,
it.
and if I don't see that everyone's got it, we'll just get in touch about, getting you the link some other way. And just the only other item I think I've got is we are just starting to look into how to come up with technology to support doing a hybrid meeting. I think Evan's been sort of taking the lead on that. We haven't got all that far yet, but we just started getting into it. So
What's that, Harry?
we had talked at our previous meetings about trying to look at how technically the commission can have a hybrid meeting. So
Oh, yeah,
some of
okay,
you were
okay,
here
yes,
and some of you
all
were
right.
at Zoom.
Okay. I didn't hear the word hybrid when you were saying
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it won't happen probably until, we're actually having one until later in the fall.
So everyone know, yeah, next 2 months, we're back to remote.
Back to Zoom.
Back to Zoom for June and July, and presumably, we're not scheduled to have any meetings in August. Hopefully, we don't.
No meetings in all of August?
We get August off. That's been our tradition.
August break.
So we'll
keep
do
our
3 in
tradition.
July.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what the demand is like. But that's been a tradition for as long as I've been here. So we'll see. And we'll probably decide in the end of July what do we want to do. Do we want to come back in person? Do we want to do something? So there we go. But I think that's our decision. So yeah. So I expect one of those July meetings would be a hearing from who's on the committee? Do you know the vulnerability? It's
Peter Henschel sent the
chair.
email. He's the chair. I know Paul Muniz is on it. I haven't sat down with those folks for an awfully long time, to tell you the truth, so I'm drawing a blank beyond that.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else?
I don't, everything? No?
Okay. Anyone else got anything?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second it.
Okay, Marcy made it. Fred seconds it. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. we're
Good night.
adjourned.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.